the Warriors can pull this off, it's curtains. So it's been a few different media outlets that's all been reporting that the Warriors do in fact have interest in trading for Paul George. I'm not gonna lie, I'm with it. I'm all in on Paul George. I'm excited that the Warriors are actually linked to somebody in free agency. Any signs of the Warriors stand pat and running it back would have been unsatisfactory for me. I ain't gonna lie, it got me kind of hyped. Paul George is a level of star coming back where it's like, okay, the Warriors might be able to do something with this. Now, I'm not saying the Warriors can't get back to contention by trading for role players, but let's be honest, at Steph's age, get a second star, bro. Like, get the man some help. Get the dude some reinforcements. Also, it just makes sense that the Warriors are going for Paul George. He's a perfect fit on and off the court. In the locker room surrounded by Steph and Draymond, I feel like Paul George's personality will fit in. And in terms of on the court, I don't think anybody can argue Paul George would be a perfect fit. I mean, he could do a little bit of everything. The only perceived downside is that he's injury prone and he's now in his mid-30s. So obviously, it's always going to be risky trading for older players. But at this point in time where the Warriors are at with their roster, this trade makes too much sense. The Warriors' interest in Paul George probably explains why they haven't offered Klay a contract. For those who aren't aware, the Warriors have not offered Klay Thompson a contract. In the way things are looking, even if the Warriors offer Klay a contract, he might just leave regardless. Obviously, that's unfortunate for Klay. He's a franchise legend, and I'm sure he feels some type of way about not being prioritized, but I'm not trying to get too far into the Klay discussion. Let's focus on a hypothetical Paul George trade. And you already know I had to fire up the good old trade machine, so let's get into it. We got Paul George and Amir Coffey for Chris Paul, Gary Payton, Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, a first-round pick and a second-round pick. One thing to keep in mind is that Paul George is on a team option, so he would have to opt into the final year of his contract in order to facilitate this trade to the Warriors. And with that, there would have to be some conversations had beforehand between Paul George and the Warriors front office, with an under-the-table handshake agreement that when Paul George opts into his contract, it's with the expectation that the Warriors are going to offer him a max contract when they extend him. All right, let's address the elephant in the room with this trade. First and foremost, Kuminga has to be in the trade, bro. It is what it is. Look, I'd love to trade for Paul George and keep Kuminga. And if this is 2K My GM mode, I could do just that. But unfortunately, this ain't 2K, bro. NBA GMs ain't going for that. Look, you got to give up something to get something. And the fact of the matter is, Magic, 76ers, and Knicks are all interested in Paul George too. So if you really think the Warriors can get away with trading for a top 20 to top 25 player without giving up any key young players, while simultaneously winning a bidding war for said top 20 to 25 player over other teams that are willing to include key young players, if you really think that, it's time to cut the Xbox off, bro. It's time to live in reality. And the reality is, unless Paul George comes out and straight up demands a trade to the Warriors and warns other teams against trading for him because he'll only extend with the Warriors, unless he does that, then Golden State doesn't have any leverage. And as far as we know, PG hasn't done that. So now that we have that established, let's break down a trade. Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, CP3, GP2. For Amir Coffey and Paul George. First of all, giving up two young players that are wings, it's not really something I would want to do. But again, when you're trading for a top 20 to top 25 player in the league, those players are hard to come by. You got to do what you got to do at that point to better the team. I like Jonathan Kuminga's upside, but Paul George is a top 20 player right now. Kuminga might be that in a year or two, but you don't know. And also, yeah, you're giving up two young wings, but you're getting an elite two-way wing back in return. That's an all-star. So it's been reported today that the Clippers are actually interested in the Chris Paul reunion. Yeah, they're more so interested in Chris Paul as a free agent if he gets bought out, but the fact still remains they do have interest in bringing in Chris Paul. I think that's a good storyline for Chris Paul. He gets to go back to the Clippers and spend his last few years competing for a title in LA, close to home, close to his family, which he prefers. One thing Chris Paul appreciated about playing in the Bay is that he was still in California and he was relatively close to home. In terms of the picks, like I said, it's a bidding war. You got three other contenders that are willing to give up real assets to get Paul George. You don't have the leverage to be stingy with your assets. If you want Paul George, if you want a top 20 to 25 player that's an elite two-way wing, you got to put some real assets on the table in the trade discussions. Otherwise, why would the Clippers trade Paul George to the Warriors? Number one, we're in the same division. Number two, we play each other 4 times a year. If the Warriors aren't going to present their best package, if that's the case, if I'm the Clippers, I'm just going to trade them to the Eastern Conference. I'm not in the business of doing my ops a favor. We've already seen what the winning formula of putting an elite two-way wing next to Steph looks like. It looks unstoppable. The last time we seen it was KD. Now, obviously, Paul George is not as good as KD was. He's a little older now, and even prime for prime, he wasn't as good of a player. And now Steph Curry's older, but the fact still remains, Steph Curry's still a top 5 player, and Paul George is still damn good. And he does a lot of similar things that KD can do, just on a lower scale. He's not the same tier of player as KD. He's a few tiers down as a player, but he does a lot of similar things, which is a little bit of everything. He's a 3-level scorer. He can get to the rim. He can operate in the mid-range. He can bomb from 3. He's a versatile 3-point shooter. He provides size on the wing. He's a defender. He's a strong rebounder. He can pass. Like I said, he can basically do a little bit of everything. When you put a wing player like that next to Steph, I mean, the proof speaks for itself. What I like about the Paul George edition is his versatility. The dude can play 4 positions. He can line him up at point guard, shooting guard, small forward, or power forward, and he can more than hold his own at any of those positions. He has the playmaking to play point. He has the defense to guard all those positions, so you could play him in virtually any lineup, and he'll always make the lineup better. Another reason to make this trade, PG can pretty much get to a shot whenever he wants. That's something the Warriors desperately need. A secondary scorer outside of Steph that can take and make tough shots and relieve some of that pressure on Steph offensively. Now let's take a look at the depth chart after the trade. You got Steph, Wiggins at the 2, Paul George at the 3, Draymond Green, and TJD. What I like about this trade iteration is that you get to keep Wiggins as your primary point of attack defender. And you got Paul George as your secondary defender. A locked-in Wiggins and Paul George as your defensive stoppers on the wing. You got TJD as your backline defense and Draymond Roman wreaking havoc. That's the makings of a strong defensive unit with a lot of versatility. Everyone in the starting lineup has a high defensive IQ. Not to mention, you're surrounding Steph with a lot of defensive talent. You got Wiggins and Paul George as shooting guard and small forward, who are both athletic two-way wings that should be able to match up and lock up any starting lineup. Imagine if the Warriors play the Celtics in the finals. You got Wiggins to put on Tatum, and you got Paul George to put on Jaylen Brown. Getting back to the depth chart, you got Pods, Lester Quinones, Amir Coffey, who, by the way, is a pretty solid back of the rotation player. He's a career 37% shooter. He's a 6'7" wing. He's solid defensively, and he can hit open shots from 3. And he's cheap. What more can you ask for? Then you got Guy Santos and Looney to round out the second unit. Looking at this roster, man, you got Steph, who's a top 5 player still. You got Paul George, who's a top 25, 20-ish player that can possibly play up to the level of a top 15 player. And when you add the Steph boost that everyone gets playing off of Curry and his gravity and his spacing, we might see Paul George unlocked even more offensively. He's never played with somebody like Steph Curry, who commands so much attention defensively. He's going to get some of the easiest looks of his career. You got Draymond coming back with a chip on his shoulder, who I expect to be a deep boy candidate. And you still have room for eternal growth for the young players you kept. Pods, TJD, Lester, Guy, all those dudes can improve, especially Pods. With CP3 gone, you're basically handing Pods the keys to the second unit, which I think he's ready for. I just got this feeling that Pods is going to be even better in the second season. He's too smart of a player, and he's too committed to improving for him not to. So I like this trade for the Warriors. And free agency hasn't even started yet, so they haven't even filled out the roster. Imagine this depth chart, and then they go ahead and grab a center in free agency. Somebody like Jalen Smith, Gogo Patase, Andre Drummond, Moritz Wagner. There's so many different ways the Warriors can go with improving the team. Trading for Paul George is definitely one of my favorite scenarios for the Warriors to improve. I think this trade puts them back in contention. I don't think the league wants to see these dudes team up. Me personally, I'm all in on this trade. But y'all let me know in the comments how y'all feel about this trade. Let's get the dialogue going, man. Let's get it popping in the comments. But anyways, that's all I got for y'all. If you enjoyed the content, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. I'll holler at you on the next one. Peace.